There was a time when Formula One cars looked nothing like the sleek vehicles we see today. They've gotten tons of makeovers over the years. Like in the 60s, these machines were way too dangerous, resulting in many tragic deaths. But as the years passed, things changed, and today it's all about style and safety. This is how Formula One cars have changed over the years. Now, to understand how these cars have evolved, let's go back in time. Most of the initial car designs that people recognize from the early era of Formula One come from the 1950s, when the racing series first officially began. These old Grand Prix cars were about being lightweight and having engines that revved up high. These cars had skinny tires and wire-spoked wheels, and they didn't worry too much about aerodynamics. But because they had a high center of gravity, they were a bit tough to handle on the track. Driving these vehicles was a lot like flying. Now, what if we told you that the history of these cars goes even further back? Like the motorsport scene was pretty much alive and kicking even in the 1930s. But the cars back then were wildly different from anything you'd see in Formula One today. Even the races uniquely took place. Instead of purpose-built tracks, drivers tore through public highways, with spectators amazed at how these machines went by at downright ridiculous speeds. When Formula One officially began in 1950, Silverstone, England was the stage for the first ever Formula One race. But Silverstone wasn't the only place where races were taking place. London streets were turning into a high-speed playground for Formula One's debut, showing the raw power and heart-pounding speed of these machines. The cars from this period were truly historic. These things were essentially wilder versions of pre-war Grand Prix cars. And it wasn't just Formula One with the best options. Nope, Formula Libre races had some pretty crazy vehicles too, with their open-wheeled cars tearing up all kinds of surfaces. You probably won't find designs like these nowadays, but back in those days, these kinds of cars were all the rage. Things shifted with the British Grand Prix. Everyone started paying attention to the unique styles and designs of the Formula One cars. This has gone down in history, solidifying Formula One as the pinnacle of international racing, attracting fans from all corners of the globe. British teams like BRM and Connaught were ruling the track back then, with their groundbreaking designs and fearless drivers dominating the scene. And speaking of drivers, most were British, adding to the nation's dominance in the sport. But still, the coolest part was the cars. Just look at Rob Walker's little underdog, the Cooper T45. This car wasn't exactly packing the biggest punch compared to its rivals, giving away nearly half a liter in engine size. Even race promoters took one look at this funny little car, but that didn't stop it from being downright revolutionary in its own right. While today's Formula One beasts have evolved, there's something special about those vintage racers that paved the way for the sport we know and love today. Then came the car designs in the 1960s, which was an era with a ton of change. Now, let's talk about the not-so-great stuff first. Back in the 60s, Formula One was hit with a wave of devastating accidents, which was a result of a lack of safety in the design of the cars back then. I mean, we're talking about over 30 drivers losing their lives in horrific crashes. It was a harsh wake-up call for the sport, forcing everyone to take a hard look at safety measures and how they could be improved. So folks came up with the monocoque chassis construction. This was a fancy way of saying that cars were built lighter and stronger, thanks to a single-piece shell design. This not only made them faster, but also safer for the drivers, with improved handling to boot. But that's not all. Engine rules got a shake-up too, with a cap on capacity set at 1.5 liters. Along came the 70s, and Formula One was ready to turn things around. This was when they introduced the Constructors' Championship, adding a whole new level of excitement to the races. More countries were jumping on board, eager to show off their racing skills to the world. Of course, this meant that it was time for even more innovation when it came to cars, which led to the creation of turbocharged cars. These cars turned out some serious power, giving drivers that extra oomph on the track. But driving these things wasn't easy. That's because there was this thing called turbo lag. Imagine pressing the gas pedal and waiting for what feels like an eternity before the engine kicks into gear. Yeah, it made for some seriously crazy moments on the track. By the 1980s, things started to really heat up in the world of F1. The 1980s also saw Formula One races popping up on every continent with a significant population, thanks to events like the Brazilian and Japanese Grand Prix, as well as the long-awaited return of the United States Grand Prix after a 20-year hiatus. Formula One was truly taking the world by storm. But with great success came great change. And the 1980s saw Formula One undergo a major transformation, as it became more commercialized than ever before. This was a decade of serious innovation that transformed the sport as we knew it. The cars were sleeker and more powerful than ever before, all thanks to the revolutionary carbon fiber chassis that hit the scene. The skeletons were aerodynamic marvels, pretty much slicing through the air. But that's not all. This era also saw a surge in technology, with sophisticated digital data systems taking the driver's experience to a whole new level. And let's not forget about electronic traction and launch control systems, adding some serious muscle to those machines. While the sport had been primarily supported by private funding in the past, a global economic downturn forced teams to get creative with their finances, exploring alternative funding mechanisms to keep the wheels turning. By the time the 90s came around, Formula One's European roots were a thing of the past. By this point, the sport was getting ready for its biggest global takeover yet. But that's not all that was shifting the F1 scene. Nope, in the 90s, corporate sponsorship was the next big thing, replacing those individual donors of previous decades. It was all about big names and big bucks, with companies lining up to get in on the action. That's why these F1 cars weren't just about performance anymore. Style was just as important. As time went on and F1 reached new audiences, the cars went for simplicity. All those fancy aerodynamic gadgets got banned. Instead, the cars sported narrower front wings and smaller rear wings. This was done for innovation and to make the cars a bit trickier to handle on the track. The 90s also saw tons of technological advancements and safety measures that transformed the championship, like the semi-automatic transmissions revolutionizing the game, electronic traction control keeping those wheels in check, and groove tires adding some serious grip to the action. Yep, Formula One was evolving, but the 90s were just the beginning of an epic journey into the future of racing. Because when the 21st century arrived, things continued to evolve in a huge way. This was the decade where Formula One really pulled out all the stops, introducing new cars, welcoming a wider range of teams, and shaking up its overall presentation style. And much like in the previous decade, safety was once again a top priority in the 2000s. The series made some serious efforts to slow things down and beef up those safety measures. And then, in 2009, we saw the debut of a true innovation: Kinetic Energy Recovery Systems, or KERS for short. Plus, we had racing superstar Lewis Hamilton tearing up the track in his Mercedes F1 W05 Hybrid, getting victory after victory in epic fashion. This thing was powered by a turbocharged hybrid engine, setting the stage for some epic action. Later in the 2010s, hybrid power units debuted, blending combustion engines with electric motors for fuel efficiency. Safety also got a boost with a Halo cockpit protection system, despite mixed opinions on its appearance. And well, that brings us to the present. So what's the biggest trend in Formula One cars nowadays? Turns out companies are focusing on efficiency and affordability. The pandemic led to a budget cap, limiting spending on car development. Teams have since adapted with simpler designs and off-the-shelf components to keep things fair and sustainable. Anyway, if you want to check out some more content on F1 racing and its history, make sure to click on this next video.